Hey there, I'm Brian Goulet of GouletPens.com, and I'm back now for episode number 92 of Goulet Q&A, my mostly weekly broadcast here. I took off last week because we were having some camera issues, but we're still kind of having some camera issues. We got a new camera, a new 4K camera, which is pretty sweet, but the audio jack wasn't working on it, so we ended up having to send it back. And then we have a backup camera that we've been using for 5.5 years to shoot all the videos up until now, and it died. Literally like it died like a couple days after we sent back the other camera. So we basically had not many camera options. So now we're shooting this one with a DSLR, which is not as ideal for a long form video like this. So I am gonna have to stop the video at several points throughout and kind of, Jenny's gonna help me edit it together as smoothly as possible. But it is what it is. It's better than no Q&A. So this week we'll have that. We are getting our replacement camera, I think, in later today. So we should be back up and going again here pretty soon with normal video stuff. But anyway, try to make it work. Be flexible is part number one of our core values. So that's where this kind of stuff comes in. So I'm sorry about missing last week. Sorry I wasn't even able to get a lot of good notice out about missing it. And then the week before that, we had kind of a different form Q&A because we had Brian Gray of Edison Pens actually visiting here for the first time ever. So that was a lot of fun. Got to do a really cool Q&A with an Edison focus. So it's actually been several weeks since I've done kind of a normal Q&A kind of thing. So I'm glad to be back in the saddle. So we've had a pretty interesting last couple of weeks. We had the DC show, which was pretty crazy. It's one of the biggest fountain pen shows, if not the biggest in the world, I believe. So it's pretty nuts, about 270 different tables there. So all different kinds, I mean, just so many pens. You can't even imagine how many pens are there. So you got lots of newer pens, you got lots of vintage stuff there as well. Really a good mix. You got nib grinders like Mike Masayama is there, and Richard Binder, and just lots of pen celebrities, if you will. So including myself, I guess. But it was pretty interesting to get to meet some folks there. I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of the business side of things because one of the Q&A questions asked specifically about that. But we got to hang out with some really cool bloggers and stuff like Brad Dowdy from The Pen Addict, Matt Armstrong, Pen Habit. Lots of other good folks, no pun intended. Carrie from the Fountain Pen Day was there, and I'm going to leave some people out, and I'm really sorry about that. But we got to see some really cool folks there and just got to meet people. Rachel and I, we don't set up a booth or anything there, but her parents live really close to there, so they can watch our kids, and we can go to the show and just basically walk around and just talk to people, do selfies, and we signed a couple autographs. I had a lot more people asking for selfies than autographs, which selfie is the new autograph anyway. So that was pretty cool. Just we spent a lot of time at the show, got to make some good inroads and some business contacts, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And then coming back from that, we've had a pretty crazy week. This week, we have had the 1670 Emerald of Chivor release, which is, it's all gone now. We still have some samples, but we expected it would go pretty quickly. We got a pretty decent stock, but still had a lot of people that wanted the ink. So we're going to be getting more in the next month or so. They tend to get shipments every month, and so it's going to be a little bit of a wait. I don't expect samples will last all that long either. We set a lot of bottles aside for samples because we knew a lot of people would want that. But it's just kind of crazy. And then literally the next day we got restocked on TWSBI Ecos, which a lot of people were waiting for. And then Edison announced they had a collier in a limited edition called Black Rose. Those sold out in like an hour and a half. We had very limited quantities of those. They only made 150 total, and we got like a slice of that pie. So those were just gone. We didn't even really give any heads up or notice or anything about that because they were just gone. So I am sorry about that. If you were interested and didn't get it, there were just super limited supplies. So it's been crazy this week. We've been trying to catch up. We've been down some folks. So we've been jumping back in. Everybody in the whole company has kind of been jumping in, help write notes, help pull orders and all that to get you your stuff that you're so excited about. So it's been a fun week so far, but now I'm glad to be back doing Q&A, and clearly I can't talk anymore, so I'll have to get back in the habit of that. So let's kick it off with some pens and writing questions. First one I have is from Alex S. on Facebook. So I'm still trying to decide what I want to do for my first pilot Vanishing Point. I mean, which nib. I haven't had a stub nib yet, but after hearing so much about the writing experience of Vanishing Point, I'm curious which would be better for the writing experience of a pilot Vanishing Point, a medium nib or the new 1.0mm stub. Okay, the stub is pretty darn new, so there's maybe some people have talked about it, but it's not like widely kind of known yet. I do have a video out on it where I compare it to lots of other stubs, and I will say it's a pretty decent stub. While I was at the DC show, I actually got to sit down next to Richard Binder and watch him grind nibs for a couple hours, so that was pretty sweet. And he had someone that wanted a sharper italic than what was on the VP stub, and he had commented that it's actually a pretty decent stub nib, which coming from him, I guess, is a compliment. So he you know, kind of reaffirmed my opinion, which is a pretty decent stub. So, but that said, it's still a stub. So I don't know, if you don't have any experience with stub nibs, it is a great first stub nib. I have a Vanishing Point here. For those of you who don't know what a Vanishing Point is, it's a click retractable fountain pen. You know, it's $140. It's a phenomenal pen. It really is. It's a great like entry-level gold nib pen, but it has this nib unit inside that you can actually swap out. So worst case, if you really can't decide between the two, you could always just pick one, and then you could get the other nib unit later, because both the medium and the stub nibs are sold in separate nib units for around $61. So it's not too bad for a gold nib to be able to swap, and then you're going to swap it out of the pen body if you ever want to change. So I guess where I'm landing is, I would say if you want to kind of play it safe, go with the medium nib, because the medium nib is more kind of a universal nib. It's going to, you know, it's going to be a little bit drier, so not quite as wet as the stub nib, so it'll be a little bit better on some less ink-resistant paper, some more absorbent paper. And it's also going to be a little more forgiving in terms of pen rotation, you know, because you've got a round tip on that medium nib versus a stub nib, which is more of like an oblong kind of shape. So it's less forgiving in terms of rotation. So if you're not used to writing with stub nibs, it takes a little bit more kind of training and practice to kind of keep your hand in the correct position to use it. It's not like terrible to have to learn, but it still is a little less forgiving than a medium nib. So I would say if you want to like really kind of go in and just commit, you know, go for the stub. It's a really good stub nib. But if you want to play it safe a little bit, go with a medium. But honestly, neither is going to be a bad choice. All right, next question I have is from Sam on Facebook. Sam asked, do you have any tips for filling a piston filler from a sample vial when the nib is too long to get the filler hole submerged in the vial? So this is a great question. I get asked this from time to time. So the Goulet sample vial looks like this. It's usually filled to about here. So it's always over 2 milliliters. So it usually ends up being 2.2, 2.3, something like that. So, but it's a 7 ml vial. So it's that high. So it's kind of a compromise, because you have to have a tall vial so that you can actually like have a pen, you know, so that if it's too wide, then the ink won't be high enough for you to fill. But if it's too narrow, you can't fit your pen in. So we found this vial to be a good balance. And we've been going with it for the last, 5 years or so. But when you have a pen, such as this Pelikan M600 that I have, so this one, when you go to fill it in here, when you have 2 milliliters, it's going to be about here. So it's not going to go all the way up to completely submerge the pen. Now it's going to displace a little bit of the ink when you actually put it in there, so it might be okay, but you're not going to get a full filling into a piston pen, because a piston pen like this is going to be able to hold close to a whole sample's worth in it. Maybe not that much in this particular pen, but some piston pens definitely will. So there's a couple of different techniques that you can use. The first and the easiest one, I would say, is to actually just kind of tilt the sample vial. So when you tilt it, instead of that ink level being here, when you tilt it, it's going to then have the ink level be much higher up. And if you tilt it with the nib face up, then you have the feed down. So, and your filler hole is usually right here on the back of the feed. So when you have it tilted like that, you don't want to tilt it so far it pours out, obviously, but when you tilt it far enough, your ink level is actually going to be right at that filler hole, and you can kind of hold it delicately and then twist the piston and fill it and get at least a good portion of the ink up into the pen. And I would recommend doing it very slowly, especially if you have a pen with fins like this, because the ink will kind of soak into the fins, and then when you're pulling it in, if you pull it really fast, it's going to suck in some air. But if you pull it really slowly, the ink is going to be able to kind of saturate these fins. As you're pulling it in, you're going to have a little more success that way. That's one technique. If that doesn't work, or if your nib is really big, like if you have like an M1000 or something huge like that, then you're going to have a little more trouble, because you're not going to even get a great filling that way. If you have a pen like the Pelikan here that I have, it actually has a removable nib unit that you can unscrew out of the pen. So if you have a pen like that, and there are you know, Pelican's probably the most popular piston filler I know that has a removable nib unit like this. But if you have a pen that does do this, you can use an ink syringe and you can fill that out of the sample vial, and then you can literally just fill it like an eyedropper pen and just drop it right in there. And then you can replace your nib unit like so. You know, obviously being careful not to twist the tines of the nib, but if you have the base of it, you can get it in there, and then, you know, you're basically good to go. It's going to kind of take a minute to saturate the feed, but then you'll be able to write. So that's one technique. There's another one that I have a full video on. I won't cover everything, but it's called the feed saturation method. If you have a pen that has fins like this, like really kind of tight fins that hold a lot of ink, then what you can do is you can put your piston all the way up, and then you can take with a syringe or like a medical eyedropper or something like that. You can suck some ink up out of the sample vial. You can just take and lightly saturate this feed, and then you just twist the piston a little bit until it sucks the ink out of the fins. And then you saturate it again, twist a little bit, saturate it again, twist a little bit. And you do that over and over and over again until you're out of ink or until your pen won't hold any more ink. So that can work really well for most piston filling pens that have fins like this. So those are kind of my recommendations. You know, if none of these methods will work, it's going to be pretty rare that you're going to have a circumstance where that doesn't do at all. Worst case, what you can do is you can cape and just kind of dip it into the pen and then just write with it, and you'll have to, you know, use it more like a dip pen, or just use it in a different pen altogether. It's pretty rare that there's a pen that's completely unusable with a sample vial, but it can happen. I can't name you a specific pen that is unfillable, but I haven't used every pen out there, so it's hard for me to say exactly that you might run into that situation. So hopefully that can at least help you out in some way, Sam. All right, next question I have. This one is from Jason L on Facebook. In general, will the ink cartridge from ink manufacturers work with all fountain pens? Specifically, will a Diamine ink cartridge work with a Pilot Metropolitan? Specifically, no. They absolutely are not universal. The only one that really is universal is called the Standard International, and that looks like this. This is the Standard International Short. There's a long version that's about twice as long as this. But this is a very kind of common looking ink cartridge. This is the style that Diamine uses. So if you look at Diamine's ink cartridges, it is called the Standard International. And what's standard about it is the end here. So it's going to click onto the pens that accept a Standard International cartridge or converter. And we usually, I mean, we always at Goulet Pens, we try to display on our site under each pen type what type of ink cartridge it will take, whether it's proprietary to that brand or whether it takes the Standard International. And there's a whole history about ink cartridges and how they've kind of come to be, knowledge that I don't have necessarily in my brain and can rattle off right at this moment. But for specifically, you're asking about the Pilot Metropolitan. The Pilot Metropolitan takes the proprietary Pilot Namiki cartridge, which looks very different than the Diamine one that would be the Standard International. Specifically, if you look at the end, it's just completely different. So if you go and try and fit a Pilot Metropolitan with a Standard International cartridge, it's going to be completely impossible, because it's just going to do that. And it's going to flop around, it's going to fall out, and it's not going to puncture, and it's just not going to work. So you need the Pilot one that mates up perfectly in there. Stick it in and it works. So basically, you would need a converter to use bottled ink, or you would need a pen that would take a Standard International cartridge to use your Diamine ones. Now, the one weird thing that I'll just go ahead and call out is Pilot actually has a version of the Metropolitan that they sell in Europe. They call it the Pilot MR, that actually is fitted for Standard International cartridges. I guess these are much more common in Europe, and for whatever reason, in the US, they use Pilot Namiki cartridges. In Europe, they call it the MR, and they use the Standard International. So if you happen to come across a Pilot MR, it's a Metropolitan that takes Standard International. So that might be a good compromise for you, maybe. But in general, you're going to need to look up specifically which type of cartridge your pen model will take. A lot of them are proprietary unless it's a Standard International. That's kind of like the one universal one that works across brands if that brand has chosen to use that Standard International fitting, if you will. So the best way to go is to look at gouletpens.com. We have a reference guide. I've put a link to it in the blog. It's called a Cartridge Converter Compatibility Guide. You can find it if you go to the Goulet Pens blog, and then under reference guides, you can get there. It is kind of buried a little bit. I admit I need to find a better way to put that up there, but basically it's a cross-reference for all of the different pens, brands, and stuff like that, and which cartridge converter it will take. So it's not an exhaustive list of like every pen ever made, but at least it's all the ones that we carry and are familiar with. So that can help you out in that way. But you can always find it on the individual product page as well. All right, now I've got a question from Smaduric on Twitter. What is up with Zoom nibs? Zoom nibs, okay. I get asked about these every so often. They're not extremely popular. Most of them come from Sailor, which is a brand that I don't carry. So I don't have personal experience using Zoom nibs, but I've done a little research and I've heard some people talk about them. If you look, John Modishaw on his site, nibs.com, has some information about Zoom nibs. I think he sells them there too. If you're interested, just a plug, I'm affiliated in no way with him, but go check it out. They're a Japanese company. So basically, Japanese, the way they write their characters, it's much more like brush pens. That's a lot of times what they use is brushes. So the Zoom nib is essentially a nib that's ground to emulate more of a brush. So when you hold it at a very high, steep angle, it's going to write a finer line. When you write lower, it's going to write a much fatter, broader, wetter line. So as you are tilting your hand when you write, you're able to vary the stroke of your characters. Sort of like, I guess, if you had a flex pen, but it's not based on the pressure that you're writing with, but it's more the angle. And I don't have a good picture of what a Zoom nib looks like. It's pretty crazy looking though. And it's a very difficult nib to grind. It's not extremely popular. So if you are basically looking for something to emulate a brush pen, the Zoom nib might be something worth checking out. But in general, it's not something that's going to be extremely useful and popular for most of the writing population, especially if you're not writing characters. All right. Got a question from Ricky. This is to round out all the pens in writing. So this is from Ricky J on Facebook. We hear a lot about top 5 pen lists that include the Metropolitan and the Safari, etc. What are some cheap pens that are not mentioned in the list but are top worthy? AKA the Platinum Plaisir, J.Herbin Fountain pen, Jinhao, Noodlers, etc., etc. Okay, so I have a video. It's actually the most popular Goulet video we've ever done, called Brian's Top 5 Fountain Pens for Newbies. It's got 140,000 views at this point, which is just crazy. It's only about a year old, so that's kind of cool. But check it out. It's the top 5 pens that I have in there. Now this is for people that are just getting into the hobby. It's the Platinum Preppy, the Pilot Varsity, the Jinhao X750, the Pilot Metropolitan, and the Lamy Safari. And I definitely stand behind all of those as great starter pens, and you can watch that video specifically if you want to see all my reasoning why. But basically, there are other good pens for sure. A lot of the other ones, there might be a little bit of a compromise here and there, but I'll go ahead and touch on some of the ones you mentioned and throw on a couple more. So you mentioned the Platinum Plaisir. Definitely, it's a good one. It's really, the guts of it are the same as a Platinum Preppy. So if you like the way the Preppy writes and you want a nicer pen body, Plaisir is a great way to go. Now, for most people just getting into pens, even spending, $20 on a Plaisir might be a bit of a commitment. So the Preppy is the same writing experience in terms of how the nib writes, but in a cheaper pen. So that's usually why I push it that way. Also, the Plaisir is made of aluminum, so you can't eyedropper convert it. The Preppy, you can do that. That's kind of a nice to have in the wings for that pen. So there's that. J.Herbin Fountain pen, it's relatively new, so it wasn't even out when I shot that video last year. It's cartridge only, which is just not as ideal for me personally, because when I first got into fountain pens, I got into it for the ink. So I know some people get into fountain pens and they like cartridges because they're easier to use at first, but honestly, you need to learn how to clean and maintain your pens pretty quickly anyway. So using cartridges just because they're easier for like a newbie, I personally take the approach more of, here's a fountain pen, here's how it works, here's how you clean it so that it writes well, and just go with that. And then you can use bottled ink, and that's just part of the experience to me. So that's usually the route that I like to go. So I don't usually go the cartridge only route as a great recommendation for newbies, just kind of personally. Well, you didn't even specifically ask about newbies, but just top pens in general. So for me, cartridge only pens are never going to really be top of my list, but the J.Herbin pen is a decent pen for, $14 or around there. I forget the exact price, but it's a decent little pen for what it is. So it's not something I would recommend against. It's just not like the go-to pen. So keep that in mind. Noodlers, you threw out Noodlers. Oh boy, okay, so Noodlers, it is a fantastic fountain pen for the price, especially if you want to get into flex pens. There's nothing else that even comes close. So The challenge though is a flex pen for someone who's kind of just getting into it, a starter pens and stuff like that, is really not, well, you know, I wonder how much if I'm focusing too much on the new thing. I know, Ricky, when you asked your question, you didn't say specifically new pens, you just said cheap pens. So, okay, I'll you know, adjust my focus a little bit here. So for a cheap pen, yes, a Noodler's pen is a phenomenal way to go, especially if you go with an Ahab or a Conrad. You can swap those nibs out with another number 6 size nib that you can get. So Noodler's has a non-flix nib that you can get for a couple bucks, and also Goulet nibs too, phenomenal to be able to swap those out. So that is still a really inexpensive option to get a pretty decent writing pen. So the flex thing tends to be something you need to get used to, and especially if you are newer, which tend to, a lot of newer people focus on cheaper pens. So that's kind of why I've been going down that road for this question. But that might not necessarily be the case. I might be making too much of an assumption here on that. But anyway, so the Noodler's flex pens can take a little bit of getting used to, but for what they are, they're phenomenally priced pens. So definitely would recommend some of those as long as you know what you're getting into. Jinhao, yes, absolutely. I had that X750 in the video for newbies, but certainly the X450, the 159 would be great options as well. Those are all the ones I currently have at gouletpens.com. I know Jinhao's got a lot of other different models that they have, but the reason I like those ones is they all use these number 6 nibs, which you can swap out with Goulet nibs or other number 6 nibs, which is kind of cool. So you can greatly increase the writability of those relatively inexpensive pens with a better nib and have an even better writing experience for really still a pretty cheap price. Let's see here, another one, QOTW Classic or Ice Sport is one that I would recommend. That's a pretty good inexpensive one. Those are cartridge only as well, kind of like the J.Herbin one. You can eyedropper convert those, so that's kind of nice. The J.Herbin one, you have to modify it to be able to eyedropper convert it, so that's kind of annoying. So I definitely don't really push that aspect of it unless you're going to totally just hack the thing and, you know, epoxy the holes and stuff, but that's kind of crazy. So I would recommend the QOTW for an eyedropper conversion, so that can be kind of cool. They got some other more broader nib options than the J.Herbin pen has, but so those can be kind of cool. Lots of different color options and things like that. So QOTW is usually a pretty decent option. Also the Pilot Parallel, for what it is, it's a $10 pen if you want to do calligraphy style. So they only have basically stub nibs on those that can be pretty broad, so it's not like a good everyday writing pen, but if you want to mess around doing some kind of calligraphy and hand lettering stuff, Parallel is a phenomenal pen for that, and they write really well, and a lot of people do nib modifications on them too. You can kind of grind away and do some cool stuff. I see some neat things on Instagram that folks are doing these days with that kind of stuff, so some interesting things to kind of play around with there. Another great one that's come out relatively recently is the TWSBI Eco. You know, for under $30 now, it's a piston filling pen that I actually think writes really well. I have one right here actually that's inked up. And you know, so it's basically similar kind of to a TWSBI 580, kind of the same mechanism, same ink capacity and everything, but the design is just a little bit different, especially on the cap. The aesthetic design is different. It doesn't have a removable nib unit though, so that's kind of like one drawback to it, but the nib and feed kind of pull out of it easily. You do have to kind of fill it in a certain way. You know, you got to fill it and then kind of draw out any air bubbles that get caught in there. That's kind of the only like thing. And TWSBI has some instructions in their literature about how to do that. But that's a you know, pretty decent writing pen for the price, especially. And then the last one, well, to finish up with the TWSBI Eco, it is a newer pen. It's really hot in demand, so it's kind of limited availability. That's one thing that's kind of tough about that at this point in time. And then the last I'm going to say is kind of the Lamy Logo or the All-Star. So those ones are going to be kind of similar to the Safari, just as a good alternative. The nibs swap on all those pens, so you can use them interchangeably. If you have different nibs on different pens, you can swap them out on the Logo, All-Star, Safari, Vista. Those are all good recommendations, so go check those out as well. So there we go. All right, just had to stop the camera, and I'm back now. Got some ink questions now. So this is from Jerry Tanta 13 on Twitter. What are some colorful inks, aka not black, that perform well on school quality paper and shade well? So Jerry, by school quality, I'm going to assume that you mean bad. At least bad, you know, absorbent, you know, feathering kind of bleed through type paper. At least in the US, that's generally what school paper tends to mean, because we don't have as strong a fountain pen culture, especially in our school system here, as you maybe would in Europe or in Japan. When I hear school grade, that's what I think is bad paper. So a good non-black ink for bad paper that shades well. Well, you're basically not going to get that. I'll just straight up say that now, because when you have a really absorbent paper, it just kills the shading on pretty much any ink. So it's gonna be a very rare exception that you would get that combination of things. So if you want good shading, you generally need better paper. That's kind of what ends up happening, because when you have ink resistant paper, then the ink is able to kind of pool up in certain places, and then that's when you get a lot of the color variation that happens with shading. Whereas if you have a very absorbent paper, the ink just kind of soaks in, and at the heavier points, rather than pooling up and getting darker and giving that shading, that color variation, it just soaks into the paper more and is going to bleed through and spread out more. So it still looks kind of flat, but it's kind of just feathers out and looks gross. So that is generally what you're going to run into. So it depends a lot on the paper quality. I'm having to make some serious assumptions here based on your question, but you're not going to get shading on this paper, is what it sounds like, pretty much with any ink. So just kind of get that out of your mind. So really you're wanting something that at least performs well on good quality paper, meaning it's not going to feather and bleed through a lot. So generally my go-tos are Noodler's Black, Heart of Darkness, and X Feather, but they're all black inks. So you asked for a non-black, and I'm going to do my best, but there's really kind of not like an obvious like, oh yes, this one ink is the Heart of Darkness of blue inks. You know, it really kind of varies a lot. The one thing I will say is if you go with a finer nib, you know, as fine a nib as you can possibly stand, that's going to help a lot. Whatever ink you're using, it's going to help a lot in terms of feathering and bleed through. So try to go with a finer nib. You're probably going to have more of a propensity towards a finer nib on absorbent paper anyway, because using a finer nib, it's still going to seem broad because it's going to soak into the paper so much. So I would say, let's see here, just kind of going with like conventional inks, like maybe a Waterman or Schaefer or Pelikan. They seem to do fairly well. They're not going to blow your mind, but they tend to do pretty well. Going with something with extreme properties, like really, you know, like bulletproof inks and stuff like that, could be kind of hit or miss sometimes. Now, some of the more permanent inks, it really kind of varies. Like Noodler's Eternal inks tend to kind of feather and absorb more. Some of the bulletproof inks tend to be better. So it's kind of hit or miss. Definitely stay away from lubricated inks, stay away from quick drying inks, generally speaking, because those tend to either be more absorbent or wetter on the page and will feather a little bit more. But going just kind of with a more conventional middle-of-the-road ink can help. Now, Pilot Iroshizuku inks are pretty good at resisting feathering, but they're a little more expensive, so I don't know if that would be as great for like a student option like what you have. And lastly, I'll just kind of say, like, I'm really open to feedback from the community on this one. Like, I haven't done exhaustive tests of all the different inks on a variety of crappy papers. So this is one thing where, like, the opinions vary quite a bit. So maybe if you all have any recommendations, throw them in the comments. That way we can help out Jerry here, and I think that would be great. Ann C on Facebook asked, can I mix Noodler's Dostoyevsky with any other Noodler's ink? I'm thinking Heart of Darkness. Secondly, I'm looking into the Noodler's comparison chart on your site. What are your thoughts on mixing Noodler's inks that are labeled no for every category, which basically means it's a conventional ink, with inks that are labeled yes for many categories, like, you know, permanent ink, you know, water resistant, UV, you know, reactive, whatever. And lastly, can I safely mix all Noodler's inks with diamines? I'm dreaming of a black-red dragon. Nice. So excluding the Baystates from this conversation. Okay, Anne. So the only big no-no is the Baystates, like you just said. You don't want to mix Baystate inks with non-Baystate inks. There's 3 Noodler's Baystate inks. You can mix them with each other, but do not mix them with others. They're completely different formulation, and it'll explode. Not really, but basically the equivalent of it. It'll just like gel up and foam up and not be great. Maybe it'd be a cool experiment if you want to just mess around with that and try it, but do it in small quantities because you're going to waste whatever ink you try to mix. Anyway, you don't ever want to put it in your pen. So you can mix inks with varying properties outside the Baystates. You can mix with varying properties, specifically if you're talking about Noodlers, like the chart things. I'm just going to kind of blend all your questions together because it all kind of covers itself. So if you're mixing Noodler's inks with each other, you can mix inks with varying properties. You know, like for example, if you have Noodler's Black, which is bulletproof and fraud resistant and all that kind of stuff. If you mix that with, I don't know, Noodler's Purple, which is just a conventional ink. No special properties whatsoever. You can mix them together and you'll get kind of a black-purple, depending on the ratio that you mix and so on. But if you think about it, you're mixing like half bulletproof, half regular. So essentially what you're going to end up with is a partially bulletproof ink. That's going to be like half bulletproof. The black portion of the ink is going to be bulletproof and the purple portion is not. You know, it makes sense. So if you mix them two together, you're going to end up with a darker purple ink. And when you wash it with water or whatever, the purple of the ink is going to wash away because it's not permanent, and the black part will stay. So that's basically what you're going to deal with. As long as you kind of understand that relationship of when you're mixing in inks with varying properties, the inks that have the whatever UV reactive or water resistant properties, that's going to retain those properties, and the other ink that you're mixing in is not going to add the properties. So it's not like if you mix it together, all of a sudden you're going to end up with some superhuman kind of ink. You're going to end up with a blend, and then the ink that doesn't have those properties is going to wash away, and the other ink that does have those, you know, permanent properties is going to stay. So that's basically what you're dealing with, if that's something that really matters to you. Now, if you're just going for color, sure. So that's definitely something you can experiment with. You can have a lot of fun. If you're talking about mixing Noodler's inks with Diamines, you know, it's like you're kind of getting into, you know, the world of total experimentation here. You know, there's some brands that say you shouldn't even mix them with each other. You know, for example, J.Herbin. I've had a lot of people that have mixed J.Herbin and it's never been a problem. But on their bottles, they say specifically, do not mix with any other ink. So that's, you know, each bottle like says, like, do not mix with any other color of fountain pen ink. So you can still do it if you want, but that's what they recommend. So yes, you're totally like taking your ink, you know, into your own hands when you start mixing stuff, you know. So we don't know all the properties that are in these inks. They don't have like full MSDS sheets and stuff like that of these inks. So you don't know like chemically what's going to react or what's going to do anything. Now, most conventional inks, it's not going to be a problem. You can mix them and it's usually not a big deal. If you're going to do that, just fully understand that you're getting into the realm of experimentation and you need to have your own level of awareness and consciousness when you're doing that. So I would recommend that you do that and mix it in small quantities. Sample vials are fantastic for that, as are ink syringes. So if you want to get, and you can measure out, you know, a milliliter or a half milliliter, whatever you want to do. So I'd recommend mixing a couple of milliliters at a time. That way you can know if what you're going to have is going to be a total dud or not, and you're not wasting a ton of ink. Then the other thing I'd recommend is that when you mix it, you know, mix it together really well, and then let it sit for several hours before you go putting it in a pen. That way if there is some kind of crazy reaction and it, you know, melts and, you know, explodes or something like that, I keep saying exploding, it's not going to explode. But if it does anything, if it gels or foams up or does anything weird, it does it in a vial and not in your pen. And then lastly, I would say start out when you're doing ink mixing and you're mixing up an ink that you've never mixed up before, do it in a pen that's like, you know, something that is relatively disposable, if you will. Don't take your, you know, grandfather's limited edition thing that he passed down from the war or whatever and throw some experimental ink in there. Just, you know, use awareness about it as to whatever it is that you're experimenting with. Preppies are great, Metropolitans are great for that kind of thing. And then last thing I'll recommend is that you check out the Fountain Pen Network Inky Recipes subforum. I've got a link to it on the blog, or you could just go searching on the Fountain Pen Network. It's one of the main subforums down there. If you scroll down a bit on the page, you can see that. And there are lots of good ink recipes that people have already mixed up and had good and bad experiences that you can learn from. Okay, next, I've got some business questions. So let's take care of business. Gary W. on Facebook asked, will we get to see more of Rachel in the video blogs and Q&As in the future? I always enjoy hearing about the business aspects of Goulet Pen Company and pen products from a woman's point of view. So great point, Gary. Definitely get a lot of requests about that. People like Rachel, which is great, very validating for me because I'm a big fan of hers personally, as well as professionally. She definitely brings a lot to the table. She is certainly like the special sauce that happens around this company. She does so much around here that you would never even know or even probably appreciate unless it was fully explained to you, and then it would just blow your mind, like how in the world does she know all this? And she's a dot connector, you know, she's got a phenomenal memory and she's just able to like put all the pieces together. So there's so much that she kind of just like does behind the scenes here, then she just like works her Rachel magic, right? So that said, she's also a great personality on the camera. Her and I play off each other well. You know, we are just one of those couples that we met when we were 17. It was like love at first sight kind of thing. We were together for almost 5 years before we got married because we waited until it was after college. And then we were together, we started this business 6 years ago, and we worked together every day since. And we're just one of those couples that we spend all our time together and never get sick of each other. So we got a good dynamic, we play off each other and stuff like that. However, one thing I will say, you know, she's tied into a lot of things going on in the company here. So she really has a lot going on. And it makes it difficult for her to come in and just like completely shift gears and do the video thing when she's got all this other stuff going on. Also, she's actually probably way more introverted than she comes across in a video. Her and I are actually, you believe it or not, her and I are both introverts. I am very introverted. Now, I've of course gotten much more comfortable in my element, and when I'm literally sitting in a room alone right now, just talking to you in the camera. So like, to me, this is not like a social setting where I have a lot of like direct personal interaction. That, to me, I have to like really get in the zone to be able to kind of do that. But I am much more of an introvert. Rachel is even more so. So for her to even sit down and shoot a video like this takes a lot for her to kind of get into it, and then it's very draining for her. So afterwards, she has to kind of come down off of it. You know, I'm sure a lot of you who are introverts can appreciate that. So that said, it takes a lot out of her to do these videos and stuff. So she doesn't do a lot of them. So what I will say though is lately we've been doing a lot more on Periscope, which is a new app. It's been around for, you know, a few months now. I think it came out in April. And we've been on it pretty much since then. So if you look on Periscope, you can get the app on your iPhone or Android. You can also check it out on the desktop. We've been doing a lot more of those. Those are live broadcasts that have a streaming chat, so you can interact with us. We end up streaming a lot of them, like honestly, at home at night once we got the kids in bed and all that kind of stuff. I'll clean my pens and just kind of chat. So it's very much of a Q&A style like this, but it's a lot more interactive. And I give like shorter answers. I don't go on for 5 or 7 minutes on one question in that Periscope format. But it's very interactive, and her and I are usually together, so we get to banter a little bit and stuff. Very different kind of dynamic than when we have sitting down in kind of a more long form video like this, but it's a very natural style for us. We actually used to do a live video called Right Time, and we did about 100 broadcasts of that. Man, it was probably about like 92, 93, something like this. So I've actually probably at the point now where I've done as many Q&A videos as we did Right Times, or right about there. So that said, she will do those and with me, and then that is a way that you can kind of get your Rachel fix and very directly ask her questions, like real time, and then you can get her opinion there. But it doesn't like drain her like these longer videos do. So I'm pushing Periscope some more. All right. Next question I have is from Brad M on Facebook. Almost every time I place an order, I also order a surprise me random ink sample. And I'm always delighted that I never receive an ink that I've previously ordered. I've ordered a fair number of ink sample packages and individual samples, so it just seems a little surprising. When issuing a random sample, do you check it against the customer's order history and make sure to send something new, or have I just been lucky? As much as I would like to say that we look up every person's order history and take that into consideration, you're just getting lucky. Now we do, the process that we have is we have like all of our ink samples, and then we have a whole separate like bin that we put up of random ink samples that we've previously selected for that purpose. And we do that so that we can get a really good variety in there. And then when we're pulling, you know, a lot of times we'll have an order, and somebody might have, you know, 10 or 20 samples in one order. That's not like every order, but every now and then we'll get that, and we'll have some surprise me samples in there. So we'll always look at what's being ordered and make sure that we're not pulling a duplicate within that order. That's pretty easy to do because we have the printout of your order, and it's pretty easy. To actually go through your whole order history, because we have some customers that have been with us for 5 years. So to go through that and have like, you know, 30 or more, maybe even orders to have to go through, like it would be too much logistically for us to do. Especially for a $1.25 ink sample, for us to go through that much and do it. Now, there probably is a way, technically, to where it could, our website could blah, 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 go in and reference and all this kind of stuff. We don't have anything built in like that to be able to reference all of your order history and everything you've ever done to pull up a sample that's never been sent. Theoretically, that is possible, but it would take a tremendous amount of resources, like developers and programmers and stuff, to calculate all that kind of stuff. Way more than you would probably want to have to absorb in your prices somehow for us to pay for that kind of development. So from a business standpoint, It really doesn't make sense for us to do that, you know, especially because we have almost 600 inks to choose from. The likelihood of you getting a duplicate, even if you've ordered a fair number of samples, the likelihood is low enough where it's probably not going to happen. And if it does, and you write back to us and say, oh, I got a duplicate, you know, we'll work with you, okay? That said, it is a bit of luck on your part. I'm really glad you haven't gotten any duplicates. You know, maybe we'll like try and get in a Zen state and like choose something you've never gotten before. But beyond that, it's just not like practical for us to go to much more lengths at this time to do something like that. But maybe in the future we could consider something like that if it becomes feasible. Mikey M on Facebook asked, did you make any new business connections at the DC Pen Show? So I talked very early in this broadcast about you know, some of the stuff that went on in the DC show. It was a lot of fun. Definitely got to talk to a lot of folks. That was the really kind of interesting dynamic for us, was on one hand getting to meet a lot of you know, direct fans, customers, whatever you want to call yourself, of ours, and get to meet you face to face. It's actually really funny how many people would come up and say, oh my gosh, you look just like you do in your videos. It's like, well, yeah, you know, it's like I don't put on makeup in the videos. Maybe I should at times, but you know, literally it's just like, here I am. Or I got a lot of like, wow, you are really tall. I got a lot of that. I'm like 6'2", so pretty tall. But yeah, so, you know, that was kind of cool. And you know, it was interesting because in previous years, we had a lot of people that have kind of recognized us, but not wanted to come up or been kind of shy about it. This year we invited a lot more people, like, hey, come up, you know, talk to us, we'll do selfies, all that kind of stuff. It seems like this year it was a lot more like welcoming and acceptable for people to kind of come up and say hi. So it was like, it was pretty crazy. There probably wasn't more than like 5 or 10 minutes at any point that we were at the show that we weren't talking to somebody. So it was almost a little overwhelming at times because of how much just personal interaction there was. And it's crazy because, you know, I'm normally just sitting here in my office shooting a video or just out and about our company and just kind of doing daily stuff. And, you know, we get like comments and things like that on, you know, on Twitter and Instagram and, you know, YouTube and stuff like that. But it's like, I'm never in a room with just, you know, fountain pen just fanatics like we are here. I mean, it's different here because in this building, yes, we're all fountain pen fans. We love it. We can talk about fountain pens all day. We do talk about fountain pens all day long, and everybody knows the lingo. We all know what we're talking about. Leave this building, and I'm just like you. You know, it's like I'm just another dude walking around, and people, when I talk to them, they ask me what I do, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I have this fountain pen store. And they're like, fountain pens? Really? You know, what are those? Or, you know, oh, people still buy those? You know, that kind of thing. And I'm like, yeah, you know, it's like same kind of stuff that you all deal with every day. It's like anywhere outside of this building that I go, people, I mean, unless they like know me from a business standpoint that like that is what I do, it's just kind of like, oh, well, fountain pens, you know, and I have to kind of go through the whole spiel. But when I go to the DC show, it's like, you know, here we have, you know, upwards of 30 people that really know fountain pens, and we can talk to each other about it every day. But you go to the DC show and it's, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of people that are all into pens. There's thousands of pens everywhere, and you're all just talking pen lingo. You can literally walk up to anybody and be like, boom, check out my pens. And they're, oh my gosh, you've got this and that and that and this and this, and here's check out my pens and blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, it's completely mind-blowing. So if you've never gone, you know, and it's feasible for you to go, it is definitely a cool experience to go to a pen show at some point in your life. I think it would be kind of cool. You know, don't like completely like, you know, sell your kid's college fund or something like that to make it happen, but if it's feasible at all, it is a pretty cool experience. And this year was definitely one of the coolest ones. So to get back to your question, Mikey, I got to talk with Brian and Andrea Gray, which is always a treat because we do a lot of business with them, and a lot of good values alignment and stuff like that. They're really good people, just solid people as well. And we got to see them. They came down to see our shop Thursday before the show, but we always make it a point to see them at the show, spend a little time with them. You know, I always try to spend a little time at his table and kind of like shoo some people over and, and then say, hey, have you checked out Edison's pen? You know, it doesn't, you know, he doesn't give me a kickback or anything for that. I just like, I love his pens, and so I want to like direct people to him. They always do real at the show anyway. They're crazy busy there. So I got to talk to them a little bit. We got maybe some future things that are possibly in the works. I won't allude to anything specific, but you know, we're always cooking up some ideas and seeing what's feasible. And then I got to meet Brad Dowdy, the pen addict, for the first time. That was pretty sweet because we've both been very aware of each other and following each other's stuff for years. And to actually get to meet face to face, he's also much taller than I expected. He's about my height, maybe even a little taller. I don't know, but you know, it's just interesting to get to meet people face to face when you haven't before. So it's kind of cool because I'm like a fan of his, and so that was kind of neat. And also he is running Knock with Jeff, and him and Jeff together are doing some cool stuff there. They're working, trying to build up the manufacturing aspect of things. So it's kind of neat. We got to almost kind of talk a whole different side of business than just like the pen blogging and reviewing side of things, because we definitely share that in common. But from a kind of manufacturing, wholesaling, retailing thing, which is kind of a little more like behind the curtain side of the magic that goes on around here than just like what you're watching right now. And those of you who like the business part of the Q&A, that's the lifting the curtain a little bit. There's definitely a lot of cool like businessy kind of things that can happen behind the scenes. So got to sit down, have some good conversation with Brad about the Knock pen cases. They've been talking for the last year about wanting to retail Knock pen cases through retailers like us. Right now they're just selling them direct, which is great. Like I stand to gain nothing right now, not one dime, from pushing Knock products, other than the fact that I think it's really good people that are behind it. I think the products are great, and I want to see them grow and thrive and succeed. So if you haven't gotten a Knock pen case yet, I fully recommend their products. Good stuff. They got some cool things that they're cooking up, and I personally would love to see them like kind of funded more so that they can get more on their feet and then begin wholesaling and retailing through people like me. That's where I would come in and really kind of help to make things blossom a little bit. But from the time being, basically all I can do is help to share my experience that I've had in the wholesaler-retailer relationship with them as they look to grow. And I won't get into any specifics, but what I can say is I was actually pretty impressed with how well thought out the whole Knock thing is, because we've worked with several other kind of like smaller startups and stuff, and Rachel and I have gone through all the pain of starting something from scratch. There are just so many things to have to set up and think through, and even the whole like wholesaler-retailer relationship as a manufacturer like they are, it's complicated. It's really complicated, and it's a lot of dog work to get things set up. But I was actually very impressed with how much they've thought things through. I think they're on a great trajectory, and I'm really excited for Knock's future, and I would love to be a part of that. So that was really cool to get to spend some good time with Brad there. Probably the biggest like direct news that we have to share is, and it's actually public now, so I can kind of talk about it, but we made good inroads with Visconti. We've been talking to Visconti for the last several years at the DC show and shooting emails and stuff, and they've always kind of been like, we really only want brick and mortars, you know, which, you know, I get that, I understand it, and actually we've gotten that kind of pushback before from even like Lamy and Pilot when we were much smaller and kind of starting out. It was like, I don't know, the brand image, and we've not had great experiences with some online retailers and stuff like that, and there's discounting that goes on and blah, 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 blah. So they have a certain brand image they want to uphold, and I get it, because Visconti, they do some really cool stuff, like really innovative things with their pens, different than, you know, and I was able to actually see like their whole spread at the table. I spent more time at their table than ever before. Got to talk to Mark Coles from Coles of London, who distributes Visconti in the US, and really got to talk through all the different aspects of the pen, and I was just like, whoa, this is really intense. Like, this is not your typical, like, just take a fountain pen and make it a different color and call it a limited edition. Like, they really, like, completely develop stuff from scratch, and it's pretty innovative stuff. So I can, as someone coming from a pen making background, I can super appreciate all the stuff that goes into what they do. I really can. It is expensive stuff. I will say that. It is definitely not for everybody. So I'm not going to try and push and be like, well, Visconti is really the ultimate that you want to try to get to. For those of you who appreciate kind of the more artisanal aspect of what they do and stuff like that, like, and the cool features and stuff, like, they got some really cool stuff going on. So we were able to make inroads there, and I think we have kind of the brand reputation now where we were able to have like a real kind of one-to-one conversation with them, and they got really excited about some of the things that we're doing, like the video and stuff, and the way that we present stuff. It's they don't have very many affiliations with online only stores. You know, they're focusing more in jewelry stores and watch stores and that kind of stuff, and, you know, higher end stationery type stores and all that. you know, brick and mortar pen stores are not exactly up and thriving. There's fewer of them every year. So in general, they're pushing more in like the kind of the luxury items, if you will. So for it to have a company like ours that's strictly focusing on writing, you know, they were pretty excited about what we were doing in terms of the way we review things and just the way that we present the product. So it was really nice to be able to actually have a conversation with them and talk about what we're doing, and they talked about what they believe in, and we're like, oh, okay, they're definitely like, they have their niche of like, you know, higher end products, but they really believe in what they're doing and they really stand behind their stuff, and they are doing it well for what they're doing. So it's like, okay, there was a good alignment in that way, and there was a good relationship that we got to build there. So we are going to now be Visconti authorized retailers, which is pretty exciting for us, because that was kind of like our holy grail, if you will, you know, of brands, because it was kind of like, you know, not like they are kind of their own little niche, right? And we're happy to be able to help you know, advocate for that line of pen. But it's like same as kind of like Omos and, you know, some of like Delta, Montegrappa, and some of these kind of higher end pens. They do things kind of a little differently than like Pilot does with the Metropolitan and stuff. So it's really kind of a different focus. And that's not, we're not like shifting away from our core base. Believe me, I freaking love the Metropolitan, and I always will. And the Vanishing Point, and the Lamy 2000, all that, like, that is always going to be like my mainstay. But I can much more appreciate kind of where Visconti's coming from, having spent more time with them, picking up all the pens, seeing all the different designs and the way they do stuff and talking about it. I can appreciate it much deeper, and I can see that there's a lot that I can offer to you all as the pen community in helping to share that of what they're doing, share it to you all. So, and if you like it, great, buy the pens. If not, great, you can still enjoy me talking about them. Cool. That's one of the cool things I like about doing things this way. So that said, we are going to be selling Visconti here pretty soon. We have our initial order in. We're going to be starting out with the Rembrandt, which is their lowest end pen, the Van Gogh, which is the next step up, and the Homo Sapiens, which is kind of one of my holy grail pens. I've always kind of wanted a Homo Sapiens, and I'm finally going to get one now. And I'm getting it with the stub, personally, with the rose gold trim. So I'm excited for that to come in. But anyway, so I'll kind of get that and fall in love with it and shoot some videos and stuff. But so those will be coming in the next several weeks. We're gonna have to photograph them and stuff like that, so it's not gonna be available right away. But that said, there are still like lots of other pens that they have, the Opera Metal and the Divina, and lots of limited edition stuff. The Pininfarina is pretty sweet, very expensive but sweet. It's like $2 grand. But anyway, so they have a lot of really cool stuff going on. If you know that you absolutely love Visconti and you want something, more information, pricing, whatever, about a model that we're not going to have, we have a new email address that we've set up, specialorders@gouletpens.com. Rachel is monitoring all that. All of our, we took special orders for a while. We stopped taking special orders for a while. Now we're lightly getting back into it. Special orders are logistically very challenging for us to do. So Rachel is going to handle this personally. So email her at specialorders@gouletpens.com if you are interested in any of the other Viscontis or any other pens for that matter that you are interested in that we don't stock regularly. You know, Watermans, Parkers, you name it. Anything like that that we don't sell regularly. Pelicans, you know, too. So we are dabbling a little bit more in that. Other things that I got to do, I got to talk to folks at Jaffa, Yair Greenberg, who is the president of Jaffa, co-founder. You know, we got to see him out in California at his place last year. So he was at the show, so we got to spend some time with them, the good folks there, and talk, you know, Monteverde, Conklin, stuff like that, give some good feedback to them. And then that was really cool. So it's nice to get to see like some of the people that we have business relationships with, but face to face, because normally we're all kind of spread out throughout the country. So that was really pretty cool. And then, let's see here, I also got to sit down for about 2 hours and sit next to Richard Binder and just watch him grind, you know. So there was I kind of stood there for a while, and then there was a chair next to him that kind of opened up. Somebody else got up, and I just asked him if I could plop down next to him. He was like, yeah, whatever. Just watch me grind. So that's what I did. So I just got to kind of see different ways, and he grinded all different kinds of stuff. He did he did a Lamy 2000 to a needle point. He ground a Vanishing Point stub to a, you know, crisp metallic. And he did lots of other kind of stuff too. He had one that somebody had bought a pen that had an oblique cut that they really liked, and they wanted another pen to match it. So he ground the oblique to match the other oblique that he had, and just stuff like that. So it was really kind of cool just to see all the different ways, because I've studied a little bit and I've talked to Brian Gray about doing different kinds of grinding and all that kind of stuff. I definitely have an interest. I don't have a lot of time to like become a nib meister myself, but I definitely have an interest in kind of how all that works and stuff. So I've studied it a little bit, and then to sit down, you know, and just literally watch him just grind and grind and grind and grind back to back like that. It was pretty intense, and this was like Sunday afternoon, so it was like the third, fourth day of the show for him, so I'm sure he was tired at that point. But it was still cool just to see him, just like somebody would plop down and be like, all right, what do you want? Well, I want da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, it's gonna be $30, great. And you would just watch him go. Then he'd like hand it back to them, how's it right? Da-da-da-da-da, back and forth a little bit. Great, perfect, wonderful. All right, Barbara will take your money. Next person, plop. And then just bam, just go, 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 go. Pretty crazy. Very impressive though. To kind of sit down and watch him work. And I know there were other nib folks there as well that got to do that. So that was really pretty cool. And then other connections, you know, like some of the other bloggers and stuff, Pen Habit. I got to meet Lay Reyes, Laypod. She was just awesome. She is an absolute delight in person. And I got to learn that her name is Lay, not Lee. So it's pronounced Lay, and so she was awesome. Got to see some of her just gorgeous Nikayas and stuff. Got to meet some other great folks. No pun intended. You know, Dan Smith, Carrie of Fountain Pen Day, several others. Instagram fans, Man and Tan. Got your M&Ms, so I want to give you a quick shout out there. But you know, there were just so many cool folks there. It was really great to get to meet everybody and to see some folks in person, just hang out. And it really felt like a community there. And it's kind of special for us at the DC Pen Show. I know I'm just totally rambling on and on now, but I know it was really just kind of reflective of the DC Pen Show for us, because when I went there in 2009, I knew absolutely nothing about fountain pens. And I had, you know, an epiphany of sorts at the show that just said, like, I need to get into fountain pens. And that really was the catalyst that kicked off my whole fountain pen obsession, and that's the reason I you know, started learning on Fountain Pen Network and started reading up on books like Gary Vaynerchuk's Crush It. That is the reason I started doing videos and yada yada yada. Here we are, 6 years later, and it's always kind of like a milepost for me. Whenever I go to the DC show, I'm kind of reflecting on how far we've come since that 2009 show. So it's really kind of cool. We're getting to know more people every time we go to the show, and it's really kind of neat to just like really feel a part of that fountain pen community. Even though I obviously know we are a part of it, clearly, but, you know, just to really kind of feel like one amongst the community is really kind of cool. So that was really a neat experience for me. So that said, my battery's about to die, so I'm going to go ahead and swap that out and finish up the rest of the questions. All right, I'm back, fresh battery, good to keep on going. Just a couple of questions left here. So to the last business question, this is from Calvin L. on Facebook. Are there any plans to add some basic handwriting tips to your continuing fountain pen education and information mission? Ah, that is a great question, and it's honestly something that I really feel like I have neglected in kind of our overall mission with the Goulet Pen Company. The honest truth is I don't have really any expertise on handwriting. It's at the point really right now where I probably would need to find some other expert to link up with in order to really be able to teach that. For me to spend the time that I know would be required to not only be able to learn and become an expert, at least an expert I feel comfortable being in handwriting, and then turn it around and teach it, I'm realistic. I don't have that kind of time to be able to invest and be able to do that. So I would need to link up with somebody. I don't have somebody in mind necessarily to be able to do that, but that's kind of where my head is at. That would be the opportunity for me, is to basically kind of take the platform, I guess, that we've built here at Goulet Pens, and then be able to kind of partner up with somebody else who's equally as much an expert in handwriting and kind of teaching handwriting. So if you know anybody, let me know. Post in the comments. I would love to know. So, you know, I personally would like to kind of increase my own handwriting abilities. I know that it takes practice, and beyond just kind of taking notes and writing letters and stuff, I personally haven't made it a SMART goal, if you will. You may be familiar with the acronym SMART if you've ever studied like any businessy type things or goal setting and stuff like that. SMART, as I like to describe it, It's defined a lot of different ways depending on what letters you want the acronym to kind of stand for, but I say SMART is specific, so setting a specific goal, like I want to improve my handwriting, you know, I want to be able to write copperplate, you know, that's specific. You know, measurable, so how do you actually measure whether you're improving or not, you know, whatever, however you would do that in a handwriting context. A can stand for a lot of different things. I like to say assignable, because a lot of the things we do around here are team-oriented, but yet we need somebody to actually be, you know, do that. Assignable, it can also stand for attainable, so making sure that it's something that you can actually tangibly do. The R for SMART stands for realistic, so if you're saying like, I want to handwrite the Bible in a month, you might not be able to do that unless you take off your work, you know, like to write that kind of volume. So things like that, making sure it's realistic, and then timely is what T stands for. So making sure you have a timeline on it. So I want to improve my handwriting by whatever, October 2016, you know, setting that as a goal. So all those things kind of come together. I have not made a SMART goal for improving my handwriting. It's just kind of been a wish in the back of my mind. Oh, I'd love to have better handwriting. Well, that's never going to happen if I leave it like that. You have to make it SMART. So that's one thing from a business standpoint. You know, like a personal productivity standpoint, when you make a SMART goal, it's much more likely to happen, or at least more likely to move in the direction of happening than if you just leave it as kind of a wish. So I haven't gotten beyond wishing for improving my own personal handwriting. So, but you know, I know that there's a huge opportunity out there. Just in general, there's a huge need out there for education on how to improve handwriting. There's definitely some stuff on the Fountain Pen Network. I honestly haven't really explored it that deeply myself, and I'll just be honest, it's not something I'm super confident in talking about a lot because I haven't really explored it myself. Me personally, I tend to like to talk from a point of having learned it and come from my own personal experience, and in that way I haven't done much, so I don't talk about handwriting all that much, even though I get asked about it from time to time. So I would love to link up with somebody. If you know somebody that's out there that's doing a great job of teaching handwriting and would be able to kind of partner up with us, I'd love to talk to somebody. So I'll just kind of throw that out there. All right, got one question here to kind of finish off. This is a troubleshooting question. So this is from Christina A on Facebook. I let a friend try out my Lamy Safari with a medium nib, but neglected to watch her. She held it straight up and perhaps at a sideways angle and probably used a fair bit of pressure. I've been having trouble with this nib being scratchy since then. And I think I'm not making it up. I have 2 Safaris with medium nibs and only one of them writes that way. Any idea what happened or how to fix it? Yeah, I got a pretty good idea what happened. Sounds like she might have messed up your nib. Not knowing anything. So when you're coming from a place of not knowing anything about fountain pens, from ballpoints and roller balls, it is not uncommon at all when you're writing with, you know, said pen, a ballpoint or roller ball. You usually write in a fairly upright position using a fair amount of pressure, and you have no real sensitivity towards writing angle, because why would you? It doesn't really matter because it's just going to write if it writes. So that said, when people are first getting into fountain pens, and usually it just only takes like 20 seconds of instruction, but if they're using it and having never written with it before at all, it's pretty much, you can assume they're going to do what they've always done with a ballpoint. They're going to hold it up really high, they're not going to be sensitive to their pen angle, and then they're going to use a fair bit of pressure. And often what happens when they do that, especially if they're off on their angle at all, it's not going to flow that well. So what are they going to do? They're going to press harder, because that's what you do with ballpoints, right? You press harder, you just swirl it and bang on it to try to get it to write. If you do that with a fountain pen, ugh, it's not good, not good. So probably, I'm guessing from what you're talking about, your symptoms here, it's probably a matter of either bent nib, which you would be able to visibly see, or the tines of the nib might be misaligned. So if you stare straight at the pen as if you were going to stab yourself in the eye, you'll see that there's 2 tines that have to align. If one of them is thrown off, it's going to dig into the paper as you're writing, especially in that one direction. So if you're looking at it, as you're looking at mine now, I'll use my hands as a bigger example here. If you're looking at it and one of the tines is misaligned, so this left one, which is my right hand, is misaligned, when you're writing in this direction, it's going to dig and scratch into the paper here. It's not going to be as bad going this direction, but when you're writing in this direction, it's going to feel scratchy. So that is probably what you have going on. If it's like just terrible and doesn't write at all, it might just be a bent and twisted, messed up kind of nib. If it's writing okay in one direction and bad in the other, then it's probably just a matter of a misaligned tine, which that would happen if there was like a pen rotation issue and too much pressure. But if it was like a steep angle and there was any kind of like aggressive stuff going on, it might just be like that nib is kind of bent and mangled and stuff. Now those Lamy nibs are pretty tough, so I will say you know, I may not immediately jump to saying your nib is ruined. It might just need a little bit of TLC. So I have a video called the Goulet Loop Tutorial, which is basically a video that shows you how to use a Goulet loop. And the reason you use a loop is to be able to inspect and align your nib tines. So I talk about how to do that in that video, so you can check out specifics there. But basically you can just use your fingernails to bend it back if it is misaligned at all. And sometimes if you've had some practice, you can even do it without a loop. It gets kind of tough, but you can just kind of bend up the tine a little bit that's low and then write with it and see if it's still scratchy and stuff like that, and you can kind of mess with it that way. At this point, you don't really have much to lose because your nib is already kind of messed up, so you can experiment a little bit. In absolute worst case, it's a Lamy pen, so you can swap it out with another Lamy nib that's, you know, $13, and you don't have to buy a whole new pen, you can just buy a different nib. But it would be worth looking into at least. And if you don't have a loop or anything, a magnifying glass or anything that you can get a better look at your nib would be helpful. But a loop is really kind of a good tool to have on hand. So that's kind of where I'll leave it at that. But you know, it's not anything. It's not anything that is the end of the world, but it is just something when you are handing a pen to somebody that's never used one before, you can explain it in such a way that's not derogatory or, you know, anything like that, because, you know, there's definitely room for coming across like a bit of a snob when you're handing somebody, say, well, this is a fountain pen and it's a very special pen, and you've never used a fountain pen, so you just don't know how to hold it. You know, if you come across, you could really come across like a jerk if you're doing it. But you say, hey, look, this is a fountain pen, they're really cool, but they just write differently than other pens, so if you don't mind, I'd like to just explain to you how to best hold it, you know, so that you can get the best writing experience like you're supposed to. And if you kind of come at it like that, like, hey, I want to help you out, these pens are kind of weird, so let me show you how to hold it, and then you won't feel like an idiot. You know, not saying it exactly like that, but that's basically kind of where you're coming at. You know, people don't want to, you know, feel dumb. So just say like, hey, I just want to help you out. You know, when I was new, it really helped me, these couple of pointers, and I was able to write with a pen great. That's the way to go about it, and that helps a lot, and that'll keep them from being embarrassed and ruining your pen. So that's the way that I would go. That said, that's all the questions I have for this week. I do have a question of the week for you that I'd like for you to leave in the comments. What's the one thing that you would go back and tell yourself for using your fountain pen for the first time? I know everybody's got different experiences using them. Some of you were taught in school and you had proper instruction. Others of you, you didn't know what the heck you were doing, and you would have appreciated someone coming and saying, hey, this is how you hold it, this is how you do whatever. So if you, now knowing what you know about fountain pens, could go back to yourself the first time you've ever held and used a fountain pen, what would you say? Love to hear it. So that's it. Glad to be back in the saddle doing Q&A. Thanks so much for watching. Appreciate it. Be sure to check out Periscope if you haven't already. Get to see some live stuff that Rachel and I like to do together. You know, be sure to check out, you know, gouletpens.com if you liked any of the products that I talked about here. And subscribe to YouTube if you want this video to kind of keep coming at you. There'll be more videos coming out soon as well. So thanks so much for watching, spending time with me, making me a part of your life. Greatly appreciate it. Thanks, and right on.